Cryptocurrency exchange FTX, Sam Bankman-Fried, was set to testify today before Congress, but in a dramatic turn of events, Bankman-Fried was arrested in the Bahamas last night after U.S. prosecutors filed criminal charges. He has also been charged by the Securities and Exchange Commission with orchestrating a scheme to defraud investors. Welcome to this special report from the newsroom of The Washington Post. I'm Libby Casey. Well, today's hearing before the House Finance Committee promised to be explosive and a grilling, in the words of at least one committee member. But now the committee still plans to gather to hear testimony from the man charged with cleaning up the mess at FTX, who's trying to sort out how investors might recoup billions in losses and what exactly happened at one of the most powerful crypto firms.
Hey guys, Sam here.
Sam Bankman-Fried is a 30-year-old former billionaire who was the founder and CEO of FTX, which was one of the world's largest crypto trading platforms.
He was known for his casual demeanor with an unusual eccentric haircut.
He wore a t-shirt and shorts and
made it his thing that he was always working and sleeping on a beanbag in his office, totally committed to building his business.
He had vowed to give away his wealth.
He was one of the largest donors to congressional campaigns over the last cycle.
He gave $40 million.
He appeared in front of congressional panels, courted regulators.
My goal has been to find ways to have positive impact on the world.
When the crypto market entered a kind of slide,
he was seen as the white knight.
And it earned him comparisons to J.P. Morgan, Warren Buffett. People even compared him to the Federal Reserve because he was emerging seemingly as the lender of last resort for crypto. In the last month, all of this has collapsed. The business is in bankruptcy, and his once $16 billion fortune has collapsed essentially to nothing.
First, I'd like to welcome Mr. John Ray III, who has been appointed CEO of FTX to oversee its bankruptcy, to testify before our committee for the first part of our investigation into the fall of FTX. I am hopeful that the arrest of Mr. Bankman-Fried, the founder and former CEO of FTX, means he will be held accountable for the fraud he has committed and the harm he has caused. He was scheduled to testify under oath before this committee today. Unfortunately, the timing of his arrest denies the public the opportunity to get the answers they deserve. Rest assured that this committee will not stop until we uncover the full truth behind the collapse of FTX. Just a few months ago, FTX was one of the largest cryptocurrency exchanges in the world, with a valuation of $32 billion in just 3 years since its founding. Today, FTX is bankrupt and possibly looted. FTX misused an approximately $10 billion in customer funds and owes creditors at least $3 billion. Today, as many as 1 million people, many of whom are here in the United States, are locked out of their FTX accounts and may recover only a fraction of their hard-earned investments.
There's an old saying, there's nothing new under the sun. And it's safe to assume that fraud and fraudsters have been around just as long as that phrase has been around. Bankman-Fried's play is nothing new. We've seen it before. In the late 1800s, when the Union Pacific purposefully inflated the price of railroad construction to line its executive pockets. Or in the 1900s, when the con man George C. Parker was arrested for illegally, quote unquote, selling the Brooklyn Bridge, Madison Square Garden, and the Statue of Liberty. And in the 2000s, when it was revealed Enron engaged in a massive corporate fraud and corruption, sending shockwaves throughout the business world. There are many comparisons you can draw between each one of these pretenders and the alleged actions of Mr. Bankman-Fried. It appears to be the same old-school fraud, just using new technology. But it's important to note, and I think it's very important to note, we still use railroads, we still buy and sell real estate, and we still rely on businesses to provide services. We have to separate out the bad actions of an individual from the good created by an industry and an innovation.
The FTX Group's collapse appears to stem from absolute concentration of control in the hands of a small group of grossly inexperienced and unsophisticated individuals who failed to implement virtually any of the systems or controls that are necessary for a company entrusted with other people's money or assets. Some of the unacceptable management practices have identified so far include the use of computer infrastructure that gave individuals in senior management access to systems that stored customer assets without security controls to prevent them from redirecting those assets. The storing of certain private keys to access hundreds of millions of dollars in crypto assets without effective security controls or encryption. The ability of Alameda to borrow funds held at FTX.com to be utilized for its own trading or investments without any effective limits whatsoever. The commingling of assets, the lack of complete documentation for transactions involving nearly 500 separate investments made with FTX Group funds and assets, in the absence of audited or reliable financial statements. First, customer assets at FTX.com were commingled with assets from the Alameda trading platform. That much is clear. Second, Alameda used client funds to engage in margin trading, which exposed customer funds to massive losses. Third, the FTX Group went on a spending binge in 2021 and 2022, during which $5 billion was spent on a myriad of businesses and investments, many of which may only be worth a fraction of what was paid for them. Fourth, loans and other payments were made to insiders in excess of $1.5 billion. Fifth, Alameda's business model as a market maker required funds to be deployed to various third-party exchanges, which were inherently unsafe and further exacerbated by the limited protections offered in certain of those foreign jurisdictions. I know that resolution of the Chapter 11 process, as well as the investigation into the causes of the FTX Group's collapse, are of keen interest to this committee and to your constituents.
Well, Mr. Ray, another bankruptcy filing revealed that Mr. Bankman-Fried personally received a $1 billion loan from Alameda Research. In a meeting with committee staff, Mr. Bankman-Fried was unaware of the terms of the repayment, interest details, and could not confidently state who authorized the loan. He claimed that he reinvested this money into the exchange, but knowingly chose to have the loan issued to him rather than FTX to avoid directly connecting Alameda Research to FTX. Can you elaborate on any significant findings in connection with this loan?
The loans that were given to Mr. Bankman-Fried were not just one loan, it was numerous loans, some of which were documented by individual promissory notes. There's no description of what the purpose of the loan was. In one instance, he signed both as the issuer of the loan as well as the recipient of the loan. But we have no information at this time as to what the purpose or the use of those funds were, and that is part of our investigation.
Did you find any business or operational activities that the entities jointly engaged in that you would consider inappropriate or detrimental to FTX? If so, could you give us an example?
Certainly, thank you. The operation of Alameda really depended, based on the way it was operated, for the use of customer funds. That's the major breakdown here. Funds from FTX.com, which was the exchange for non-U.S. citizens. Those funds were used at Alameda to make investments and other disbursements.
With that, I'm going to call on the gentleman from North Carolina, Mr. McHenry, who is a ranking member of the committee. You are now recognized for 5 minutes.
There are different groups of businesses under the FTX platform. or umbrella. Your declarations separate the businesses into 4 silos. We described that.
Yes, for structural purposes and just for ease of presentation, we tried to take the over 100 entities and we put those in 4 silos. To demystify that, it's very simple. There was a U.S. silo, which was the FTX U.S. exchange for U.S. Investors. There was an international exchange called FTX.com, again for non-U.S. persons that invested in crypto. There was Alameda, which is purely a crypto hedge fund, which made other investments, venture capital type investments. Then there's a 4th entity, which was purely investments, and although our investigation is not complete, those investments were most likely made with either Alameda money or money that originally came from FTX.com. But that 4th silo is just purely investments.
And who owned those 4 silos?
All those entities were, owned or controlled by Sam Bankman-Fried.
So in your testimony, you said that there is, quote, an absence of independent governance throughout the FTX group, end quote. Yet Mr. Bankman-Fried has said that, quote, he wasn't running Alameda or making decisions on the Alameda side, end quote. Is this an accurate statement by Mr. I assume you're going to say your statement's accurate. Is Mr. Bankman-Fried's statement accurate?
I don't know the basis for his comment. I will note that he owned 90% of Alameda.
So, but you've seen no distinction in governance between the two?
Oh, absolutely not. There's no distinction whatsoever. The owners of the company could really run free rein across all 4 silos.
Thank you for testimony.
How much have you been able to secure, and where are most of these assets located?
We've been able to secure, over $1 billion of assets. We've secured those to cold wallets in a secure location. It's an ongoing process, though, which will take, weeks and perhaps months to secure all of the assets.
Are most creditors located in the U.S. or foreign jurisdictions?
The majority of the creditors trade through the .com silo and are outside of this jurisdiction, although there are some foreign customers that are on the U.S. silo and vice versa.
So it is my understanding you established 4 silos. Can you explain why you believe establishing these silos and taking this approach will maximize asset recovery for creditors? And do you think this approach could help determine what happened to the $1 billion that is gone missing?
Yes. So one of the reasons why we set up the silos the way we did was to first focus on the FTX silo for the U.S. It's a relatively smaller trading volume, fewer users. It's truly meant, to be for the U.S. customers. The .com silo is really for non-U.S. customers, so there's a logical reason why we separated those 2 out. The Alameda Fund, well, that's just the fund that, that drew resources from the exchanges. So it's really separate. It was not for customers per se. It was just simply a hedge fund.
As we here in Congress consider the possibility of legislation in this area, what is the one thing that you have seen in your short amount of time at FTX that you will urge us to keep in mind or is needed the most?
I don't want to speak to detailed regulations or make observations about regulations. That's certainly not an area of my expertise. However, we're dealing with people's money and their assets. And, my basic observation is you need records, you need controls, and you need to segregate people's money.
For 5 years, I've been trying to ban American investments in crypto. I'm the only member of the House to get an F from the only crypto-promoting organization that rates members of Congress. My fear is that we'll view Sam Bankman-Fried as just one big snake in a crypto Garden of Eden. The fact is, crypto is a garden of snakes. Now, from the outside, crypto just looks like a non-fungible token, an electronic pet rock for the 21st century, something that might be good to invest in even though it has no apparent value because you might get somebody else to buy it from you for even more. But in reality, the hope of crypto is to be a currency, to compete with the US dollar, and to announce its advantage over the US dollar in that competition. It puts the advantage right in the name. Crypto, hidden currency. Well, is there a big market for that? Is there a big advantage that crypto has over the US dollar if it actually became a currency, which it's not yet? Well, there are drug dealers, human traffickers, sanctions evaders who will find that to be a good feature. And as Sam Bankman-Fried would tell you, there's a hell of a market for bankruptcy court evasion. But the big market is tax evasion. And I know there are some on the other side who cheer every time a billionaire escapes taxes. The other announced purpose of crypto is to compete with the US dollar as a world reserve currency, thereby enriching the corporate billionaire bros and taking thousands of dollars of advantage away from every American family, because we benefit from being a reserve currency. Now, Sam Bankman-Fried, or should I say inmate 14372, had one purpose in all of his efforts here in Congress. Was a well-known figure, only one wearing shorts. His one purpose was to keep the SEC out of crypto, to provide a patina of regulation, baby regulation from the CFTC. And I'll have one comment from my colleagues. Don't trash Sam Bankman-Fried and then pass his bill. I fear that could happen because Sam was not the only crypto bro with PACs and lobbyists, and there is no PAC or lobbyist here to work for efficient tax enforcement or sanctions enforcement. Now, I've heard from some on the other side criticizing the SEC. In July in this room, I criticized the head of the SEC for not going, the head of enforcement of the SEC for not going after crypto exchanges. But the fact is that without objection, I'd like to put on the record a letter signed by 19 Republican members designed to push back on the SEC, a brushback pitch, if you're familiar with baseball.
Without objection, such is the order.
Thank you. Attacking the SEC for paying attention to, and I'll quote, the purported risks of digital assets. And I'd like to put on the record, without objection, comments from 8 members made in this room that were designed to attack the SEC as being a Luddite and anti-innovation for their efforts. We know that Sam Bankman-Fried is already faces criminal charges, but he did have help. Will you be looking for and turning over to U.S. Law enforcement authorities information about the possible criminal actions by Ryan Salome, Carolyn Ellison, and the other folks in the fancy apartment?
We are doing a thorough investigation, and we will, of course, we have been cooperating with the U.S. regulators and law enforcement agencies, so we will cooperate to turn over any information that would be relevant to them.
Thank you. And I'll point out in particular that one of the counts, count 8 in the complaint or indictment, is violation of campaign finance laws. And I hope that what you will turn over is a list of the major bonuses and or loans. It's reported that Ryan Salome got a $55 million loan, so that law enforcement can piece together when those loans and bonuses were made and whether they immediately preceded illegal campaign, disguised campaign contributions. Can we count on you to do that?
Yes, I can confirm that.
The SEC specifically alleges that one way in which Mr. Bankman-Fried diverted FTX funds to Alameda Research was by directing customers to deposit cash into Alameda-controlled bank accounts. Mr. Ray, could you explain how FTX was able to conceal that?
We're still, somewhat early in our investigation, but we can confirm that funds were deposited directly into Alameda as opposed to FTX bank accounts. Unfortunate, obviously, situation.
One last question on the bankruptcy. It's been reported that FTX Digital and FTX Australia were not included in the bankruptcy filing because local regulators had already initiated their own proceedings. Is it true that they could not have been included because of that?
Yes, our filing occurred on November 11, and there was other filings that had occurred shortly before.
One last thought, Mr. Ray. Clearly, your profession is cleaning up messes that other people have made. That's a fair way to describe it. Not messes that you made, but they made. How does this compare, in your experience, magnitude-wise?
Well, it's
the worst or the worst by magnitudes?
It's one of the worst from a documentation standpoint. Even in the most failed companies, you have a fair roadmap of what happened. We're dealing with literally a sort of a paperless bankruptcy in terms of how they created this company. It makes it very difficult to trace and track assets, and particularly, as I've said, in the crypto world. It's really unprecedented in terms of the lack of documentation.
Bankman-Fried clearly tried to exhibit himself as the brightest of the bright. But being bright neither makes you honest nor a fool, does it? Thank you, Mr. Ray.
Thank you. The gentleman from Texas, Mr. Green, who is also the chair of the Subcommittee on Oversight and Investigations, is now recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And I thank the witness for appearing today. Sir, I have in my left hand a sealed indictment from a grand jury as it relates to Mr. Samuel Bankman-Fried, and in my right hand, the Securities and Exchange Commission's complaint that has been filed against the same defendant. Let's put aside the civil complaint. I have one question, but first I'd like to lay a predicate by going through these charges in the criminal complaint. Wire fraud on customers, conspiracy to commit wire fraud on lenders, conspiracy to commit commodities fraud, conspiracy to commit securities fraud, conspiracy to commit money laundering, and the list goes on with a few others. I mention these things to you, sir, because Dr. King reminded us that nothing in all the world is more dangerous than sincere ignorance and conscientious stupidity. Mr. Bankman-Fried has pretty much indicated that he just made a big mistake, that he was doing the best that he could to be a servant and of great service to humankind. But I would also mention this: he did attend Canada USA Math Camp, a summer program for mathematically talented high school students. He also has a degree from MIT, 2014, bachelor's degree in physics with a minor in mathematics. Is all of this just one big mistake that was made by this gentleman, sir, as you see it, based upon what you've seen so far? It looks to me like there may be some malfeasance here.
We're certainly, investigating everything that happened relative to these circumstances. At this stage, we're trying not to, lay judgment or put labels on actions. We're focused on, accumulating and maximizing the assets for the victims. That's our number one priority. In doing so, we will also investigate potential causes of actions to maximize value. And that does require us to get into the underlying facts and motivations and what happened. So we fully expect to explore that.
Thank you.
Thank you. The gentleman from Colorado, Mr. Perlmutter, who is also the chair of the Subcommittee on Consumer Protection and Financial Institutions. You're now recognized for 5 minutes.
Thanks, Madam Chair. Mr. Ray, I have so many questions, it's hard to even figure out what questions to ask. So let's just start with some easy ones. How long have you been on this job?
4 weeks.
4 weeks. Do you know when the Madoff bankruptcy was filed?
Probably circa 2008, I guess. I don't know.
So say 2008. And do you know they just made a distribution out of that bankruptcy last week?
That's what I understand, yes.
So that's, what, 14 years? How
Yes.
old are you?
Is that a permitted question?
Because I want you to add 100 to whatever your age is when you finally untangle all of this. And the reason I say that is we watched this FTX, but a bunch of other crypto companies start thrashing about, say, 9, 10, 12 months ago. And as the house of cards started falling down, the thrashing became more. We had something like that in Colorado back in the 80s when the savings and loans were failing, and everybody was sort of trading their funny money. We called it trading cats for dogs to hide lousy loans, to not show the failures of those particular banks. Here, your job, I think, as the bankruptcy trustee or conservator or whatever you are, is to go gather as many assets as you can, and that could be from some very innocent people who got paid money, to then spread it out equally among who you think the real creditors are, or, I mean, is that sort of a fair statement?
It's a general statement, but it's not far off.
Well, because we on this committee, and a number of us had to deal with the Madoff stuff, one of the things you're going to face is some guy say, I'm more innocent than that guy. I should get to keep my money, even though I got paid yesterday, but I'm an innocent guy. You're going to be dealing with so many preferences, so many fraudulent transfers. I mean, have you any idea what the total money in and the total money out of FTX was?
We don't have a full accounting at this early stage, no.
Do you know how much was in tokens? So let's say I have Dogecoin, or I don't even know how you say it, but I have 10 Dogecoin, which a year ago, is it Dogecoin or Dogecoin? Dogecoin. All right, I have 10 Dogecoins, all right? A year ago, 10 Dogecoins, for sake of argument, was worth $1,000, so $100 a coin. I put that in there. But Dogecoin today is worth, like, I don't know what, say not nearly that much. I mean, how are you going to evaluate that as to what I should get out of the bankruptcy?
Well, at first it starts with doing an accounting and a tracing of all the assets, both the ins and the outs. And that's made difficult, of course, by the commingling of assets. So perhaps you may have invested in a certain coin or an altcoin. We'll have to trace what happened to that coin because, again, what we've explained here today and through our testimony is there's commingling of assets, so that makes it a bit more complicated than simply how much is my coin worth, right? So it's gonna be a painstaking process of looking for the ins and outs, what happened to your crypto. Of course, at the bankruptcy, at the time of the bankruptcy, we know when that occurred. We have a very specific time when that bankruptcy occurred, and we will look at customer accounts as of that date, and that will be determined essentially what your account position was. But of course, assets, vary in terms of fluctuating in value. And again, because of the circumstances we find ourselves in the lack of documentation, the potential commingling between silos, and then also what happened with Alameda taking funds from FTX.com, it isn't as simple as, you know, how many coins did I have in my account?
Well, I guess what I'm saying is if I put $1,000 in and it's gone, and I put 10 Dogecoins in and they're gone, eventually you're going to have to figure that out. And my guess is you will be back here in a year when you have a better handle on the numbers to be talking to this committee. And thank you for doing this. I yield back.
Thank you very much. You know by now that Mr. Perlmutter is a bankruptcy attorney. You can tell by those questions. So this would be a good time to enter into the record without objection. I would like to enter into the record the indictment of Sam Bankman-Fried by the Southern District of New York that was unsealed this morning, and the separate filings from the Securities and Exchange Commission and the Commodity Futures Trading Commission, both of which were filed this morning. Thank you. With that, the gentleman from Michigan, Mr. Huizinga, is now recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and Mr. Ray. I'm going to get my colleague to shift a little bit or get up. Thank you. One quick question. Have you been sharing your findings with the SEC at all as you've been going through this?
Yes.
Okay. How about the Southern District of New York?
Yes.
Okay. I'm going to get to a couple of practical questions because I think these were the things I was going to ask you and then also ask Mr. Bankman-Fried. In your declaration, you said that the, quote, the FTX.com platform was not available to U.S. users, close quote. However, earlier this month, CFTC Chairman Benham suggested in testimony before the Senate Agriculture Committee that 2% of funds housed at FTX.com were from U.S. individuals. Can you confirm whether there were U.S. individuals or persons, in fact, customers of FTX.com?
Yes, we found that there's a small number of U.S. customers that had engaged in as customers at.
Is 2% small in your estimation, or is it less or more?
We don't have those kind of numbers on an investor basis. We have it on a customer basis, but you're talking about less than a couple hundred.
But it could amount to billions. I mean, you said earlier it is billions of dollars that was in there, or at least it could be millions or hundreds of thousands. We don't know that number, or do you know that number?
I don't know. I don't know that number. You know, billions would sound very, very high.
Okay.
Right?
Well, you had mentioned that there was billions in it.
Yes. Yeah, but clearly,
I'm giving you the range.
Yeah,
So
clearly, as U.S. customers, there we don't have an accounting of what those particular customers had in the
okay.
.com exchange.
Will determining this be part of your work through this bankruptcy process?
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah. Okay. And my remaining 2 minutes, I want to turn a little bit to operations. Is there any evidence of his parents' involvement in the operations?
We're investigating that, as well as any other, players in the
Email, Slack. Signal.
It's billions of records. It's a very vibrant environment.
So I hear that you haven't discovered that. I mean, it would seem interesting that that they didn't either give legal advice or business advice or parental advice, maybe.
Well, certainly, clearly, and I think in our first day papers we indicated that that Mr. Bankman had given legal advice.
Okay, had he been an employee of FTX, as has been reported?
I don't know if he actually had an employee status, but he certainly received payments from, the family did receive payments.
Okay, that sounds like employment to me. You got a payment for, okay. Well, I raise that because on December 8 of 2021, I met with Sam Bankman-Fried in my office, which I will note was just immediately before he came down to the hearing. He was at least 15 minutes late, and his father accompanied him in that meeting. I asked and focused on what types of regulation he was under, his engagement with regulators, and how that affected FTX. But it seems to me that there's a lot more to uncover here. Certainly, Mr. Bankman-Fried has let's say, wooed many in New York, Silicon Valley, around the world, and yes, certainly here in D.C. He was, they loved, I think everybody loved the exciting idea of a politically progressive, smart entrepreneur who was going to reimagine capitalism and change the world, feeling better about themselves, all while making them gobs of money. And I'm glad to see it's finally unraveled. So my time is up, and I yield back.
Thank you. The gentlewoman from Ohio, Mrs. Beatty.
Here we've got tokens, which evidently were things of, quote, value, valued in some way or another, that were used as collateral, living in places called wallets, not in banks. So my question for you, that feels to me like what's exotic and different about this. How much more challenging is your job going to be because you're now operating in a world of tokens and wallets as opposed to dollars and banks? And what might, I know you're hesitant to get into regulatory questions, but what should we be thinking about, if nothing else, to help with more smooth unwindings of the inevitable bankruptcies that will occur in this industry moving forward?
The principal issue that the company is facing in the crypto area, and it is from a technology perspective, it is different from the other bankruptcies because it is it's not a plane, not a boat. It's this crypto asset, and it has inherently some difficulties. The assets can be taken or lost. We have assets that are in what are called hot wallets, and those are in cold wallets. Hot wallets are very vulnerable to hacking. If you've done any looking on the internet, you'll find that hacking is almost ordinary course in this business sector. There are lots of vulnerability to the wallets. So this company, unfortunately, had a very, very challenging record here. For some transfers, there was no pathway for it. Our keys aren't stored in a centralized location. We don't know where all of our wallets are. Passwords were sometimes kept in just plain text format. So this company was sort of uniquely positioned to fail. The lack of discipline on control of the wallets, their storage, the storage of passwords, allowing multiple users to set up accounts, almost created an environment where there was not a complete inventory of wallets. You can learn some lessons from that. I mean, you need to have more controls, more discipline, more centralized accounting functions, more oversight and management. That's not to say that things won't happen. The hacking might occur.
Yeah. Thanks, Mr. Ray. I have one more question, but I really appreciate that. We got to follow up on that because that's something for us to do. The other thing that I can't stop thinking about here is, again, 30-year-old gazillionaire. I get it, all sorts of attractive things. Some of the supposedly smartest money on the planet, venture capitalists who are paid tens of millions of dollars to invest money, and maybe I wouldn't care if it was just the money of the very wealthy, but they're investing pension money. They're investing university endowments, companies like Lightspeed, Sequoia, Greylock, the best of the best invested in this. And you told us, you made a statement that this was the worst governance, the worst you had ever seen. Did you see any evidence of any appreciable due diligence on the part of these entities that gave Sam Bankman-Fried hundreds of millions of dollars?
Yeah, I'm not aware of what these parties may have done in terms of their due diligence. It is surprising, obviously, in light of all the circumstances. But I don't know what they did internally to verify these investments. So well, obviously, only they know that.
Thank you. Thanks very much. Yield back.
Thank you. Mr. Ray, you have said that, among other things, Alameda and FTX used customer funds to make investments in a variety of businesses and ventures. Have you seen any documents suggesting that the recipients of those investments did any due diligence as to the source of funds being used by FTX and Alameda?
I've not personally seen any documentation relative to other parties' due diligence. I'm not sure we would necessarily be privy to that, but we certainly haven't found anything to date.
On the flip side, have you seen any indication as to whether adequate due diligence by FTX's institutional investors would have raised red flags?
I don't know what work they did. Obviously, they found themselves in a fairly grave position. I don't know what due diligence they may have done. It's hard for me to answer that.
Is there any indication as to whether any potential investors before the events in November took a pass on investing after taking a hard look at FTX?
Again, I'm not really privy to what due diligence people may have done. It's just not something that I've got visibility to.
So from owning a company myself and both responding to due diligence requests and making them as we looked at companies, we kept significant records of the due diligence, both that we requested and that we responded to. Are you seeing evidence that any such records were being kept by FTX?
Not that I'm aware. Again, part of my testimony is that the company's record keeping was very minimal. Even as to some of the investments, we don't even have the complete transactional documents that govern the investment itself. So I think that speaks somewhat for your question.
And again, just to give you a chance to reiterate, from all of your experience throughout your career, you find that to be remarkable, I would take it.
Yeah, truly remarkable.
Well, thank you again for being with us today. And Chairman, thank you. I yield back the balance of my time.
Mr. Bankman-Fried leaked his written testimony to Forbes today. Just one more link in a long chain of dissembling and lies from Mr. Bankman-Fried. So I think it's important to allow you to respond to anything he put in there on the record here with us. He really makes two pointed assertions. One is that you haven't engaged with him and haven't allowed him access to his passwords and accounts. Can you explain to the committee now why that is the appropriate course of action?
Well, for a couple of reasons. I mean, first of all, we wanted an independent, examination. We didn't want to rely on people who were potentially compromised, and as we now sit here today, we know that was a wise decision, right? Yes. Second of all, what he was asking for fundamentally was to allow access to a system that we know just hours after the bankruptcy filing, he had dissipated assets from the estate.
I think those two are sufficiently good reasons. I'll reclaim. The second broad point he makes is that were he allowed to restart FTX, he could raise the financing and make customers whole. That's, I think, a fair paraphrasing of what he's asserting. Again, can you respond to that and whether that's true and credible?
In my history of doing corporate restructurings, I don't find that remotely believable, because the first thing an investor would have to do is pay several $1 billion just to have the company, back to the position it was in. So it's a fantastic idea.
It would be throwing good money after bad in the biggest sense of the word, right?
Correct.
Good, thank you. I just wanted to give you that opportunity. And I also want to associate myself with the very thoughtful line of questioning from both Ms. Ocasio-Cortez and Mr. Timmons, actually, from both sides of the aisle on the timeline here, and I'll just reiterate the timeline quickly. On November 6th, FTX Group was facing a liquidity crisis. On November 8th, FTX withdrawals were halted. On November 9th, Mr. Bankman-Fried sent an email to the Attorney General of the Bahamas saying the Bahamian customers could make withdrawals as they had, quote, segregated funds for all Bahamian customers, end quote, despite his awareness of FTX's withdrawal halt. And then on November 10th, 2 days after withdrawals were halted, nearly $100 million in cryptocurrency was withdrawn by those, quote, asserting to be Bahamian customers. And then, quite conveniently for Mr. Bankman-Fried's counsel, he is arrested right before he was due to provide hours worth of sworn testimony to Congress. Mr. Ray, do we have your commitment that as you continue to unravel this ball of yarn and pull on these relative threads here, that if you find any evidence of improper collusion between Mr. Bankman-Fried and any authorities in the Bahamas or elsewhere, that you will make that known to us?
Absolutely.
Thank you. And I want to close really with comments directly to the broader industry here. And I've long said that I'm neither a crypto bull nor a bear. My job as a policymaker is not to deliver new products or technology, but rather to advance laws and regulations that protect consumers, that preserve market integrity, and advance the US dollar as the world's reserve currency. And I maintain this market and tech agnostic position. I think it's the appropriate one. We need strong and clear regulations here from Washington. But I do want to say that my patience with the crypto bulls is wearing thin. It's been 14 years, and the American public has heard lots of promises, but it has seen lots of Ponzi schemes. For crypto, it's time to put up or shut up. It's worth noting that ARK, the innovation investor, several years ago identified 5 general-purpose technologies of the future: DNA sequencing, artificial intelligence, robotics, energy storage, and blockchain. And yet those first 4 disruptive technologies have already delivered game-changing innovation that affects my constituents in daily life. Blockchain has thus far delivered white papers and podcasts about Bitcoin and DAOs and NFTs, DeFi, and more. And it's all interesting, it's exciting even, but none of it has achieved product market fit at scale. And it's time for the blockchain investors and entrepreneurs to build things that matter or to lose more credibility. Madam Chair, I yield back.
Thank you very much. Without objection, I would like to enter into the record the closing statements from Ranking Member McHenry and myself. And I'd like to thank you, Mr. John Ray III.
Chairwoman
for your
Waters.
presence here today.
Chairwoman Waters, I've not had an opportunity to testify or to question the witness.
I'd like to thank you for your presence.
Chairwoman Waters,
And for the
parliamentary inquiry.
yes.
Are all members entitled to question witnesses?
You are, and if you would like to miss the votes on the floor for everybody.
Hey, it's
just
the
one
chairwoman's
moment.
prerogative to call
Just
it recess.
1 moment,
That's your
please.
decision, not mine.
Just 1 moment, please. You may go right ahead and have 5 minutes. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
You're certainly welcome, sir.
Mr. Ray, earlier today you said FTX was one of the worst bankruptcies you have handled in your 40 years of legal and restructuring experience. Under Mr. Bankman-Fried, FTX had almost no record keeping, risk management, or accounting. In fact, FTX had 0 accountants on their payroll. Mr. Bankman-Fried explained to Bloomberg Businessweek that FTX's accounting was done by him, and in his head, quote, "I was real lazy about the mental math. The complete lack of any basic record keeping makes it difficult to track down assets and untangle this mess. Are you aware of any additional wallets the co-founders potentially have access to that contain debtor assets?"
No, we're not.
There's also been very little attention to the banks that FTX had a relationship with. I don't know that I've heard about any questions today, but the ties between FTX and Farmington State Bank began in March when Alameda Research invested $11.5 million in the bank's parent company, FBH. Do you have any insight or additional information as to why a small agricultural lending bank with really no footprint in fintech or crypto has a relationship with FTX?
No, that's the subject of our inquiry. I mean, we do know, obviously, we made that investment.
Well, thank you. I appreciate that. You've also stated that Alameda's business model as a market maker required deploying funds to various third-party exchanges, which were inherently unsafe and further exacerbated by the limited protections offered in certain foreign jurisdictions. To your knowledge, are any of the FTX co-founder or their family members affiliated with third-party exchanges that received funds from Alameda?
We're certainly investigating that. It's going to take some time to dig through that, but that's clearly a part of our focus.
Thank you. I appreciate you coming here today, and I'd like to yield the balance of my time to the ranking member, Mr. McHenry.
I yield back. Thank you.
Wow.